The summer dust swirled across the auction platform as Margaret Turner clutched her 5-year-old son Henry to her chest, her eyes downcast to hide the tears threatening to spill. The crowd of Central City, Colorado, had gathered in the town square, murmuring and pointing as Sheriff Wilkins read the notice of debt collection: $723 owed to the bank after her husband's death, money she had no means to pay. Next up, the Turner woman and her boy. Healthy female, 24 years of age, capable of cooking, cleaning, and all manner of household duties. The boy comes with her, 5 years old, strong for his age, the sheriff announced, his voice carrying across the dusty square in the June heat of 1878. Margaret flinched at being described like livestock. 8 months ago, she'd been a respectable rancher's wife. Then typhoid had swept through Central City, claiming Thomas and leaving her with a mountain of debt she hadn't known existed. The bank had seized their modest homestead, and now, according to Colorado territorial law, they could claim her labor to satisfy the remainder of the debt. Bidding starts at $300 for a 5-year contract of servitude, Sheriff Wilkins continued. Remember, you'll be responsible for basic necessities for both of them. Henry whimpered against her skirts. "Mama, why are these people looking at us?" "Esich, darling," Margaret whispered, smoothing his dark hair. "Everything will be all right." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. $300, called a voice from the crowd. Margaret's heart sank as she recognized Jeremiah Blackwell, owner of the Rusty Nail Saloon. Working for him would mean a life of degradation. $350, countered Mrs. Henderson, who ran the laundry. Hard work, but at least it was honest. $400, Blackwell shot back. Margaret looked up at the sky, praying for deliverance. The bidding continued, rising steadily as several townsfolk competed. Her stomach knotted when the bidding reached $600 and only Blackwell and Eustace Morgan, the mine owner with a reputation for working people to death, remained. $650, Morgan called out. $700, Blackwell said with a smirk. The crowd had fallen silent. Margaret could hear her own heart pounding in her ears. Henry was trembling now, sensing her fear. $700 going once, Sheriff Wilkins called. The sound of hoofbeats cut through the tension. A tall man on a chestnut stallion appeared at the edge of the square, riding at a steady pace toward the auction platform. His face was partially obscured by the wide brim of his hat, but there was something familiar about him that made Margaret's breath catch. $700 going twice, the sheriff continued, eyeing the approaching rider. The man reined his horse to a stop at the platform's edge. Dust settled around him as he removed his hat, revealing sun-weathered features and piercing blue eyes that fixed directly on Margaret. "They stay with me," he announced, his deep voice carrying across the now silent square. Sheriff Wilkins cleared his throat. "Mr. Cooper, if you're bidding, you'll need to state your price." $800, he said, dismounting in one fluid motion. "I'm covering Margaret Turner's debt in full, and she and her boy come home with me. As free people." The crowd erupted in whispers. Margaret stared at the man, finally recognizing him. Noah Cooper, her late husband's friend from the war. They'd met only twice before, at their wedding and at a town social 3 years ago. "Mr. Cooper," Sheriff Wilkins began, "the law states—" "I know what the law states," Noah interrupted, striding forward. He pulled a leather pouch from his vest and tossed it onto the platform. Gold coins spilled out, glinting in the sunlight. "That's $1,000. Pay the bank their $723 and give Mrs. Turner the difference. I'm not buying her labor, I'm settling her debt." Margaret could scarcely breathe as Noah Cooper climbed onto the platform and stood beside her. He didn't look at her, keeping his eyes fixed on the sheriff. "This auction is concluded," Sheriff Wilkins announced after counting the money. "Mrs. Turner, you're free to go. The crowd dispersed, some looking disappointed, others relieved. Margaret remained frozen in place, one hand on Henry's shoulder. "Mr. Cooper," she finally managed, "I don't know how to thank you." Noah turned to her then, his expression softening. "No need for thanks, Mrs. Turner. I made a promise to Thomas that if anything happened to him, I'd look out for you both." "I never heard of such a promise," Margaret said, confused. "He wouldn't have told you. It was between us." He knelt down to Henry's level. "Hello there, young man. You've grown since I last saw you." Henry peered up at him cautiously. "Are you taking us away?" "I have a ranch about 20 miles east of here," Noah explained, looking back up at Margaret. "You'll have your own cabin. It's not much, but it's clean and safe. You can stay as long as you need to get back on your feet." Margaret swallowed hard. Pride warred with practicality in her mind. She had nowhere to go, no money, and a child to protect. "Why not buy the contract like the others?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Noah's jaw tightened. "Because no person should own another's labor through force or circumstance. I've seen enough of that to last several lifetimes." He stood, replacing his hat. "The offer stands. You can come with me now, or I can give you the difference from the debt payment and you can make your own way." Margaret looked down at Henry, then back at Noah. "We'll come with you, Mr. Cooper, and I'll work to repay you every cent." A ghost of a smile crossed Noah's face. "We can discuss that later. For now, let's get you both out of this heat." He gestured to his horse. "I have a wagon waiting at the general store. I need to pick up some supplies before we head out." As they walked through town, Margaret felt the weight of stares following them. She held her head high, though inside she was shaking. Henry's small hand clutched hers tightly. "Mama," he whispered, "where are we going?" "Somewhere safe," she answered, hoping with all her heart that she was right to trust Noah Cooper. At the general store, a loaded wagon waited, hitched to 2 sturdy draft horses. Noah helped them up onto the seat before going inside to conclude his business. Margaret took the moment to study the man who had just changed their fate. Through the store window, she could see him speaking with the shopkeeper, pointing to various items. His movements were confident but not showy. There was a quiet strength to him that reminded her of Thomas, yet something distinctly different to a reservation, perhaps even a sadness behind his eyes. When Noah emerged with the last of his purchases, he secured them in the wagon bed and untied his stallion, which would follow behind. "It's a few hours' ride," he said, climbing up beside them. "The road's not bad this time of year, but it'll be sundown by the time we arrive." As the wagon pulled away from Central City, Margaret felt a curious mixture of relief, gratitude, and apprehension. She had no idea what awaited her at Noah Cooper's ranch, but as she watched the town recede behind them, she knew that whatever came next had to be better than what she had just escaped. The road wound through pine forests and across rolling meadows bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Henry eventually fell asleep against Margaret's side, exhausted from the day's events. "He looks like Thomas," Noah observed quietly. Margaret nodded. "In his eyes and chin, Thomas would have been proud to see him grow." "He was a good man," Noah said. "One of the best I knew." "How did you know about our situation?" Margaret asked. "We haven't seen you since the social in '75, Noah finished. "I've been away, working cattle drives down to Texas. When I returned last week, I heard talk in town about the auction." His hands tightened on the reins. "I couldn't let it happen." "You paid far more than necessary," Margaret pointed out. Noah shrugged. "Thomas saved my life twice during the war. There's no price too high for that kind of debt." They fell into silence after that, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the rhythmic clopping of hooves. Margaret found herself studying Noah's profile against the setting sun, wondering about the life of this man who had so dramatically intervened in hers. As dusk settled over the land, they crested a hill and Noah pointed ahead. There it is, Cooper's Reach. In the valley below, Margaret could make out a sturdy log house with smoke curling from the chimney, several outbuildings, a corral, and beyond them, green pastures where cattle grazed. It wasn't the largest spread she'd seen, but it looked well maintained. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "It's home," Noah replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "My father started it, and I've been adding to it whenever I can." As they drew closer, a woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. "That's Mrs. Abernathy," Noah explained. "She keeps house for me and cooks. Lives in town with her son, but stays here when I'm home from drives." The wagon rolled to a stop in the yard, and Noah jumped down to help Margaret and the still sleeping Henry. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Mrs. Turner and her son Henry," Noah said as the woman approached. "They'll be staying in the old cabin. I mentioned they might be joining us." Mrs. Abernathy's assessing gaze softened when it fell on Henry. "Poor little mite, all tuckered out. I've got stew on the stove and the cabin's been aired, though it could use a woman's touch." "Thank you," Margaret said, shifting Henry in her arms. He was getting too big to carry, but she couldn't bear to wake him. "Let me," Noah offered, gently taking the boy from her. Henry stirred but didn't wake as Noah carried him toward a small cabin set apart from the main house. Margaret followed, taking in her new surroundings. The cabin was simple but sturdy, with a small porch facing east. Inside was a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, a small table with chairs, and a curtained-off sleeping area. Noah laid Henry on the bed behind the curtain. "Mrs. Abernathy brought sheets and blankets earlier. The mattress is new. I had it delivered last week." "You were that certain we would come?" Margaret asked. Noah straightened, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I was certain I would offer. The choice was always yours." Mrs. Abernathy appeared at the door with a tray. "I've brought some supper. The pump for water is just outside and there's wood stacked by the door. If you need anything else, the main house is just a holler away." "Thank you," Margaret said again. Feeling overwhelmed by their kindness when they were alone, Noah lingered by the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow I can show you around and we can discuss arrangements." "Mr. Cooper," Margaret began, "I want to be clear about my position here. I intend to work to repay you and then Henry and I will move on." Noah nodded slowly. "As I said, that's your choice, but there's no rush. Right now, you both need time to settle." He tipped his hat slightly. "Good night, Mrs. Turner." After he left, Margaret sank onto a chair by the fireplace, the events of the day finally catching up with her. Tears she had been holding back all day spilled down her cheeks. She cried silently for Thomas, for the home they had lost, for the humiliation of the auction block, and for the uncertain future that lay ahead. Yet beneath the grief and fear, there was a flicker of something else, a tiny spark of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, their fortunes had finally begun to turn. Morning light filtered through the cabin's small windows, waking Margaret from a surprisingly deep sleep. For a moment, she was disoriented. Then the memories of the previous day came flooding back. She sat up quickly, looking for Henry, but his side of the bed was empty. Panic rose in her throat until she heard the sound of childish laughter outside. She dressed hastily and stepped onto the porch to find Henry in the yard, watching in fascination as Noah demonstrated how to rope a fence post. "Morning, Mama," Henry called, waving excitedly. "Mr. Cooper is teaching me to be a cowboy." Noah looked up, a genuine smile transforming his usually serious face. "Good morning, Mrs. Turner. I hope we didn't wake you. The young man here was up with the sun." Margaret smoothed her rumpled dress, suddenly conscious of her appearance. "Not at all. I'm usually an early riser myself, Mrs. Abernathy left breakfast keeping warm in the oven, Noah said, coiling his rope. I told her she could take the day off since it's Sunday. Sunday, Margaret repeated, dismayed. I've lost track of the days completely. No church service today, I'm afraid, Noah said. Pastor visits once a month from Central City. He was here last week. Margaret nodded, watching Henry as he attempted to twirl the rope Noah had given him. Her son looked happier than she had seen him in months, his face alight with excitement. He's a quick learner, Noah observed, following her gaze. Thomas would be proud. Yes, she agreed softly. He would. After breakfast, Noah took them on a tour of the ranch. Cooper's Reach encompassed nearly 2,000 acres, with about 300 head of cattle, a small herd of horses, and enough cultivated land to grow feed and some vegetables. It's not the biggest spread in Colorado, Noah explained as they walked, but it's good land. My father chose well. Is he? Margaret left the question unfinished. Passed on 8 years ago, Noah replied. My mother even before that. It's just me now. And the hands, she asked, noting several men working in the distance. 4 full-time plus extras during roundup and driving season. He pointed to a cluster of small cabins beyond the barn. They bunk there, eat in the cookhouse. Good men, all of them. Henry ran ahead, chasing a butterfly, his earlier reserve completely forgotten. He seems to be adjusting quickly, Noah commented. Margaret smiled faintly. Children are resilient, and I think he's been starved for open spaces. Our place in town. It was very small. She hesitated, then added, I should tell you that I don't know how long Thomas's debts have been accumulating. I wasn't aware of our financial situation until after he died. Noah nodded. Thomas never was good with money matters, too generous for his own good. You knew him well then, since we were boys. Grew up together in Missouri, joined up together in '61. His expression grew distant. Saw things no man should see. Thomas got through it better than most, kept his humanity. A comfortable silence fell between them as they walked back toward the cabin. Henry had found a stick and was using it as an imaginary horse, galloping around them in circles. Mr. Cooper, Margaret began. Noah, he interrupted gently. Please. Noah, she amended. I meant what I said last night. I need to earn my keep here. I can cook, clean, mend. Whatever is needed. Noah considered this. Mrs. Abernathy handles most of the household matters, but she'd welcome the help. And come fall, we'll need extra hands for preserving. For now, though, I'd say your main job is helping your boy heal from what you've both been through. Margaret's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. You're very kind. Not particularly, he said with a self-deprecating smile. Just doing what Thomas would have done for me. That afternoon, while Henry napped, Margaret took inventory of their new home. The cabin was simple but sound, with a root cellar beneath the floorboards for storing vegetables, and a small loft above that could serve as Henry's room when he was older. Someone, presumably Mrs. Abernathy, had stocked the pantry with basic supplies. There was a knock at the door, and Margaret opened it to find Noah holding a wooden crate. Some things I thought you might need, he explained, setting it down on the table. Clothing mostly. There's a family in town with a girl about your size who's moved away. Her mother was happy to sell some of her things, and some clothes for Henry from one of the ranch hand's boys who's outgrown them. Margaret lifted out a simple but well-made blue dress, 2 white blouses, a woolen skirt, and various other essentials. Beneath those were sturdy clothes for Henry, including a tiny pair of boots. I can't accept all this, she protested. Consider it an advance on your wages, then, Noah suggested. I'll keep a ledger if it makes you feel better. Margaret ran her fingers over the fabric of the dress. It had been months since she'd had anything new to wear. After Thomas died and their finances collapsed, she'd sold most of her belongings to buy food. "Thank you," she said finally. "I'll repay every cent." Noah nodded, seemingly satisfied with this arrangement. "There's something else I wanted to discuss." Henry mentioned that he's never learned to ride. "We couldn't afford a horse in town," Margaret explained. "Every boy should know how to ride," Noah said. "With your permission, I'd like to teach him. There's a gentle mare that would be perfect for him to start on." The joy such an offer would bring to Henry was impossible to deny. He would love that. "Thank you. Tomorrow, then." Noah turned to leave, then paused. "Will you and Henry join me for supper at the main house tonight? Nothing formal, just thought it might be nice not to eat alone." Margaret smiled. "We'd be delighted." After he left, Margaret held the blue dress against herself, catching a glimpse of her reflection in the small mirror hanging by the door. For the first time in months, the woman looking back at her didn't appear completely defeated. The days began to take on a rhythm at Cooper's Reach. Mornings, Margaret helped Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks, learning the routines of the ranch. Afternoons, while Henry had his riding lessons with Noah, she worked in the kitchen garden, finding unexpected peace in the simple act of coaxing life from the soil. True to his word, Noah kept a careful ledger of expenses and Margaret's earnings, though she noticed that he consistently overvalued her work. When she confronted him about it, he merely shrugged and said, "Fair wage for fair work." As June gave way to July, Margaret watched Henry flourish. His nightmares, frequent after Thomas's death, had nearly stopped. He followed Noah around like a shadow whenever permitted, soaking up knowledge about horses, cattle, and ranch life. One evening, returning from the garden with a basket of vegetables, Margaret paused at the sight of Noah and Henry by the corral. Noah was on one knee, patiently showing her son how to untangle a bridle. The gentleness in his hands, the attentive tilt of his head as he listened to Henry's questions, sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. Noah glanced up, catching her watching them. He didn't smile exactly, but something in his expression softened. Margaret felt her cheeks flush as she hurried toward the cabin, confused by her reaction. That night, after Henry was asleep, she sat on the porch steps, watching fireflies dance in the darkness. The main house was still illuminated, and she could see Noah's silhouette as he moved past the window. In the month since they'd arrived, she had come to know him as a fair, hard-working man who treated his hands with respect and showed endless patience with Henry. But there remained a reserve about him, a distance he maintained despite their daily interactions. The screen door of the main house creaked open and Noah stepped out onto his porch. He lifted a hand in greeting when he spotted her, then, after a moment's hesitation, walked across the yard to join her. "Can't sleep?" he asked, settling beside her on the steps. "Just enjoying the night air," she replied. "It's so quiet here compared to town." Noah nodded, looking out at the dark landscape. "That's why I could never stay in the city for long. Too many people, too much noise." "Yet you went on those long cattle drives," Margaret observed. "With dozens of men and thousands of cattle, that couldn't have been quiet." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "That's different. There's a rhythm to it, and at night when you're on watch, it's just you and the stars and the sound of cattle breathing." He glanced at her. "Thomas told me you grew up on a farm in Kansas." "Yes, until I was 16. Then my parents lost it in '70 during the drought." The memory still stung, even after all these years. "We moved to Colorado for my father's health. The mountain air was supposed to help his lungs. Did it?" Margaret shook her head. "He died the first winter. My mother passed 2 years later. That's when I met Thomas. He was kind to a girl with no family and few prospects. He wrote to me about you," Noah said quietly. "Said you were the smartest, strongest woman he'd ever known." Margaret laughed softly. Thomas always did exaggerate. I don't think he was exaggerating, Noah said, his voice low. Not about that. Their eyes met in the darkness, and something unspoken passed between them. Margaret looked away first, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. It's getting late, she said, standing, and tomorrow's wash day. Noah rose as well. Good night, Margaret. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice followed her into sleep. July brought scorching heat and afternoon thunderstorms that rolled across the plains with dramatic displays of lightning. The ranch hands worked from dawn until the worst of the midday heat, then again in the evening hours. Margaret took to bringing water and sandwiches to the men working the fields, Henry often accompanying her on these excursions. One particularly hot afternoon, they found Noah and two hands repairing a section of fence damaged in the previous night's storm. Lunch, Henry announced proudly, carrying a small bucket of water while Margaret handled the food basket. The men gratefully accepted the provisions, finding shade under a lone cottonwood tree. Henry peppered them with questions about their work, which they answered with good-natured patience. Mrs. Turner, said Liam, one of the younger hands, these are the best biscuits I've had since my mom has. High praise indeed, Margaret replied with a smile, but Mrs. Abernathy deserves the credit for the recipe. But not for the execution, Noah added. Mrs. Abernathy can't make a biscuit rise to save her life. This sent the men into gales of laughter, as the housekeeper's culinary shortcomings were apparently well known. After they finished eating, Henry convinced the hands to let him help hammer in fence posts, an activity they supervised with exaggerated seriousness. He's a natural, Noah commented, watching Henry's determined efforts. He's happier than I've seen him since before Thomas died, Margaret admitted. He talks about you constantly, you know. Mr. Cooper says this and Mr. Cooper showed me that. A flush crept up Noah's neck. He's a good boy, eager to learn. He needs a man in his life, Margaret said softly. I'm grateful for the time you spend with him. Noah looked at her then, his blue eyes intent. It's no hardship. I enjoy his company. He hesitated, then added, and yours. Before Margaret could respond, one of the hands called out a warning. A massive storm cloud had formed on the horizon, moving toward them with alarming speed. We need to head back, Noah said, immediately alert. That's going to hit within the hour. They gathered their things quickly, and Noah lifted Henry onto his horse. Ride with me, partner. We'll outrun that storm. Margaret rode with Liam, and they set off at a brisk pace toward the ranch buildings. The sky darkened ominously behind them, and the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and ozone. They reached the ranch just as the first fat droplets began to fall. Noah hurried Margaret and Henry to their cabin while the hands secured the livestock. Stay inside, he instructed. These summer storms can turn nasty. The storm hit with full force minutes later. Rain lashed against the windows and thunder crashed overhead. Henry, initially frightened, calmed when Margaret suggested they make a game of counting seconds between lightning and thunder to determine the storm's distance. A particularly close strike illuminated the cabin in blinding white, followed almost instantly by a deafening crack of thunder. Henry yelped and buried his face in Margaret's skirts. It's all right, she soothed, though her own heart was racing. We're safe in here. A pounding at the door startled them both. Margaret opened it to find Noah drenched and breathless. Lightning struck the south pasture, he explained. Started a fire. The men are handling it, but I wanted to check on you both. We're fine, Margaret assured him, ushering him inside. You're soaked through. Let me get you a towel. Noah accepted the towel gratefully, rubbing it over his face and hair. His shirt clung to him, revealing the muscular contours of his chest and shoulders. Margaret found herself staring and quickly turned away, busying herself with stoking the fire. "Is the fire bad?" she asked. "The rain's keeping it contained," Noah replied. "But I should get back out there." Henry tugged at Noah's sleeve. "Can I come help? I'm not scared anymore." Noah knelt to the boy's level. "That's brave of you to offer, Henry, but I need you to stay here and protect your mother. Can you do that for me?" Henry nodded solemnly, puffing out his chest. "Yes, sir." Noah ruffled his hair, then straightened. To Margaret, he said, "I'll come back once we've got everything under control." "Be careful," she said, surprising herself with the depth of concern in her voice. Noah's eyes held hers for a long moment. "I will." The storm raged for another hour before gradually subsiding. True to his word, Noah returned, looking exhausted but satisfied. "Fire's out," he reported. "No significant damage." Margaret insisted he sit while she prepared coffee. Henry, worn out from the excitement, had fallen asleep on his bed. "You have a very brave son," Noah commented, accepting the steaming mug. "Not many 5-year-olds would volunteer to face a storm and a fire." "He wants to be like you," Margaret said simply. Noah looked down at his coffee. "I'm not sure I'm the best example." "Why would you say that?" He was silent for so long that Margaret thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and strained. "I've done things I'm not proud of. During the war, after. There are nights I can't sleep for remembering." Margaret moved to sit beside him. "Thomas had those nights too." "Thomas was a better man than me, always was." Noah's hands tightened around his mug. "He never lost himself like I did." "What do you mean?" Noah shook his head. "It's not fit conversation." "I'm stronger than I look," Margaret said gently. "And sometimes speaking of burdens makes them lighter." The fire crackled in the silence as Noah seemed to debate with himself. Finally, he set down his mug. "After the war I was lost, angry, took to drinking, fighting, rode with some men I shouldn't have for a while, nothing outright illegal but skirting the edges." His jaw tightened. "Then Thomas found me in a saloon in Denver in '69, half dead from a knife fight. Brought me back here to my father's ranch, sobered me up, made me remember who I was supposed to be." Margaret listened without judgment, seeing the pain etched in the lines around his eyes. "Thomas saved my life," Noah continued. "Not just physically. He reminded me that there was still good in the world worth fighting for." He looked up at her. "That's why I had to help you and Henry. I owed him that and more." "Is that the only reason?" Margaret asked softly. The question hung in the air between them. Noah's gaze traveled over her face, lingering on her lips before meeting her eyes again. "No," he admitted, his voice barely audible above the dying storm. "Not anymore." The tension between them was palpable, charged like the lightning that had illuminated the sky. Margaret became acutely aware of her quickening pulse, the warmth spreading through her body that had nothing to do with the fire. Noah stood suddenly, breaking the moment. "I should go. It's late." Margaret rose as well. "Thank you for checking on us and for telling me." At the door, Noah paused. "Margaret, he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "Sleep well." After he left, Margaret stood by the window, watching his figure disappear into the main house. Something had shifted between them tonight, something significant that both thrilled and frightened her. As July melted into August, the rhythms of ranch life continued. Margaret's days were filled with work that, while challenging, brought her a satisfaction she hadn't experienced in years. Her evenings were often spent with Noah, sometimes with Henry, sometimes alone after the boy had gone to bed. These quiet conversations became the highlight of her days. They spoke of their childhoods, of books they had read, of hopes and disappointments. Noah gradually revealed more of himself, his struggles after the war, his efforts to rebuild his life, his dreams for the ranch. Margaret shared her own journey, the loss of her parents, her brief happiness with Thomas, her fear and determination after his death. With each exchange, the connection between them deepened. Margaret found herself noticing small details about Noah, the way one corner of his mouth lifted higher than the other when he smiled, how he absently rubbed the scar on his left hand when deep in thought, the gentleness with which he always addressed Henry. One hot afternoon, Noah suggested they take Henry to the swimming hole on the far side of the property. "It's fed by a spring," he explained. "Stays cool even in August." They packed a picnic and rode out together, Henry perched in front of Noah on his horse. The swimming hole turned out to be a deep, clear pool at the base of a small cliff, shaded by cottonwoods and willows. Henry was ecstatic, splashing in the shallows while Margaret and Noah watched from the bank. When Henry begged Noah to teach him to swim, the man readily agreed, patiently supporting the boy as he learned to float and paddle. Margaret, sitting with her skirts tucked around her and her feet dangling in the cool water, felt a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. This felt like family, like belonging. The thought brought both joy and guilt. Was it disloyal to Thomas's memory to feel this way? To look at another man and feel her heart quicken? "Mama, watch me," Henry called, dog paddling with Noah's hands hovering just beneath him. "I see you, darling. You're doing wonderfully," she called back, pushing her troubled thoughts aside. Later, as Henry napped on a blanket in the shade, Noah sat beside Margaret at the edge of the pool. "He's a natural in the water," Noah commented, his hair still damp from swimming. "He takes after his father in that," Margaret replied. "Thomas loved to swim." Noah nodded, a faraway look in his eyes. "I remember. We used to race in the creek behind his family's farm when we were boys." He glanced at her. "Do you still think of him often?" "Every day," Margaret admitted, "but differently now. At first there was only pain. Now there are good memories too." She twisted a blade of grass between her fingers. "I think he would want us to be happy, Henry and me." "I think so too," Noah said quietly. Their hands lay side by side on the blanket, nearly touching. After a moment's hesitation, Noah's fingers moved to cover hers. Margaret looked up, meeting his gaze. "Margaret," he began, his voice low. "I know it hasn't been that long since you came here, and maybe it's too soon to speak of such things, but I find myself, Mr. Cooper." A shout from the trail interrupted him. They turned to see Liam riding toward them, looking urgent. Noah stood quickly. "What is it?" he called. "Riders coming," Liam reported, reining in his horse. "Looks like Blackwell from town and some others. They're asking for you and Mrs. Turner." Margaret felt a chill despite the summer heat. Jeremiah Blackwell had been one of the bidders at the auction. What could he want? "Stay with Henry," Noah instructed her, already moving toward his horse. "I'll handle this." "No," Margaret said firmly, waking her son. "This concerns me." "We'll come too." Noah looked like he wanted to argue but nodded curtly. They quickly packed up their things and headed back to the ranch, reaching it just as Blackwell and 3 other men rode into the yard. "Cooper," Blackwell greeted, his tone falsely cordial. "And Mrs. Turner." "Looking well, I see." "What brings you out here, Blackwell?" Noah asked, positioning himself slightly in front of Margaret and Henry. "Business," Blackwell replied, dismounting. "Concerning the lady and her boy." Margaret felt Henry press against her skirts. She placed a protective hand on his shoulder. "What business?" Noah demanded. Blackwell pulled a document from his coat. "I've purchased Mrs. Turner's debt from the bank, all legal and proper." He held up the paper. "Sheriff confirmed it." "Seems they were a bit hasty in accepting your payment that day." "That's impossible," Margaret protested. "The debt was settled." "Not quite," Blackwell smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. There was an outstanding loan on your husband's cattle that wasn't factored into the auction price. With interest, it comes to another $300. Noah's expression darkened. This is nonsense. Any such debt would have been included in the original sum. Check with the bank if you don't believe me, Blackwell said with a shrug. But in the meantime, the law says Mrs. Turner still owes, and I've acquired the right to that debt. He looked Margaret up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. I'm willing to discuss terms of repayment. Get off my property, Noah said, his voice dangerously quiet. Now, Cooper, don't be hasty. I'm being generous here. The lady can work off her debt at my establishment. Good money in serving drinks to thirsty men. Margaret felt sick. Everyone knew what serving drinks at Blackwell's saloon really meant for a woman. Noah took a step forward, his hands clenched into fists. I said get off my property. Now. Blackwell's false congeniality vanished. This isn't over, Cooper. The law's on my side. Sheriff will be out here tomorrow to enforce it if need be. He looked past Noah to Margaret. Enjoy your last night of respectability, Mrs. Turner. The men mounted up and rode away, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Noah, Margaret's voice trembled slightly. Is it possible? Could there be another debt? Noah's expression was grim. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. He turned to her, his eyes softening. Margaret, I promise you, you will not be going anywhere with Blackwell. Not tomorrow, not ever. But if the law, hang the law, Noah interrupted fiercely. I'll pay whatever is owed, and if that doesn't work. He trailed off, jaw clenched. What? She pressed. Then we'll find another way, he said simply. I won't let him take you. The conviction in his voice steadied her, but fear still coiled in her stomach. She had seen firsthand how little protection the law offered to women in her position. What do we do now? She asked. Noah looked toward the setting sun. It's too late to ride to town today. First thing tomorrow I'll go speak to Judge Wilson. He's a fair man. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Try not to worry tonight. Whatever happens, I'll handle it. But sleep proved elusive for Margaret that night. She lay awake, listening to Henry's even breathing and wondering what the morning would bring. The thought of being forced to work in Blackwell's saloon filled her with dread, not just for herself, but for what would happen to Henry. A soft knock at the cabin door startled her. She rose quietly, wrapping a shawl around her nightgown, and opened the door to find Noah standing there, looking as sleepless as she felt. I'm sorry to disturb you, he said. I saw the light and thought you might still be awake. I can't sleep, she admitted, stepping aside to let him in. In the dim light of the single lamp, Noah's features seemed more sharply defined, his eyes darker, more intense. I've been thinking, he said, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Henry. There might be a way to resolve this situation permanently. How? Margaret asked. Noah took a deep breath. Blackwell's claim is on you as Thomas Turner's widow if you were no longer a widow. He let the implication hang in the air. Margaret's breath caught. Are you suggesting? Marriage, Noah confirmed, his gaze steady on hers. As my wife, you would be under my legal protection. Blackwell couldn't touch you. Margaret's mind raced. But that would be, we haven't, it would be a marriage of convenience. Would it? Noah asked softly. He took a step closer. Margaret, I need to be honest with you. What I was trying to say at the swimming hole today. My feelings for you are not merely convenient. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Noah, let me finish, he said gently. I've grown to care for you deeply, and for Henry. These past months with you both here have been the happiest I can remember since before the war. He took her hands in his. I know it's soon, perhaps too soon after Thomas, and I would understand if you don't feel the same, but even if you don't, this offer stands. I would consider it an honor to protect you both, to provide for you, to be a father to Henry. Margaret looked into his face, this man who had rescued her from humiliation, who had given her and her son safety and respect, who had gradually revealed himself to be honorable, kind, and worthy of trust. A man she had, almost without realizing it, come to love. "It wouldn't be merely convenient for me either," she whispered. "My feelings for you, they've grown stronger each day." The hope that blazed in Noah's eyes made her breath catch. "Then you'll consider it," he asked, "becoming my wife?" "Yes," Margaret said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Not just to escape Blackwell, but because I want to, because I care for you too." Noah's hands tightened on hers. "I should do this properly," he murmured, then slowly knelt before her. "Margaret Turner, will you marry me? Will you make a family with me here at Cooper's Reach?" Tears pricked at Margaret's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Noah stood and with infinite tenderness cupped her face in his hands. "May I?" he asked, his gaze dropping to her lips. Margaret nodded, and Noah lowered his head, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that started gently but quickly deepened as months of growing attraction finally found expression. Margaret's arms wound around his neck as she returned the kiss with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Noah rested his forehead against hers. "We should ride to town at first light, find the judge and the preacher. The sooner it's done, the better." "What about Blackwell?" Margaret asked. "Once we're married, his claim becomes invalid." "You'll be my wife, legally under my protection." Noah's expression hardened briefly. "And if he tries anything else, he'll answer to me." Margaret nodded, then glanced toward the curtained alcove where Henry slept. "What about Henry? Should we wake him, tell him our plans?" Noah smiled. "Let him sleep. We can tell him in the morning." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Though I don't think he'll be surprised. He asked me last week if I was going to be his new pa." Margaret's eyes widened. "He did? What did you say?" "I told him that would be up to his mother," Noah replied, "but that nothing would make me happier." Tears of happiness spilled down Margaret's cheeks. Noah gently wiped them away with his thumbs. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "It's late and we have an early start tomorrow." "Stay," Margaret said impulsively, then blushed at her boldness. "I mean just to talk a while longer. I don't think I could sleep now anyway." Noah smiled. "Neither could I." They sat together by the dying fire, hands entwined, speaking in low voices of their hopes for the future, until the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows. Morning brought a flurry of activity. Henry was overjoyed at the news, throwing his arms around Noah's neck and calling him Pa immediately. "Are you sure you're all right with this?" Margaret asked her son as she helped him dress. "It's happening very quickly." Henry looked at her with Thomas's serious brown eyes. "Mr. Cooper makes you smile, Mama, and he teaches me things like Papa used to. I think Papa would like him." Margaret hugged him tightly, marveling at the wisdom of children. They were preparing to leave for town when a cloud of dust on the horizon announced approaching riders. Noah's hand went to the rifle mounted on his saddle. "Stay behind me," he instructed Margaret and Henry. As the riders drew closer, Margaret recognized Sheriff Wilkins along with Blackwell and Judge Wilson. "Looks like they decided not to wait," Noah muttered. The riders pulled up in the yard. Judge Wilson, a dignified man in his 60s, spoke first. "Cooper, Mrs. Turner, I apologize for the early call, but Mr. Blackwell here was most insistent that this matter be resolved immediately." "There's nothing to resolve," Noah replied firmly. "Any debt, Mrs. Turner might still owe, I'll pay in full right now," Blackwell sneered. "It's not about the money anymore, Cooper. It's about the principle. The woman made commitments she didn't honor." "That's enough, Blackwell," Sheriff Wilkins cut in. He turned to Noah. "Cooper, we need to see the documentation of the original debt settlement." Noah nodded. "It's in my office. But before we go inside, I'd like to make something clear. Mrs. Turner and I were just about to ride to town to see the judge and the preacher. We're to be married today." This announcement clearly surprised the visitors. Judge Wilson raised an eyebrow. "Is this true, Mrs. Turner?" he asked. Margaret moved to stand beside Noah, her head held high. "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Cooper has asked me to be his wife, and I have accepted." Blackwell's face darkened with anger. "This is a transparent attempt to circumvent the law. The debt existed before any supposed engagement." "Perhaps," Judge Wilson acknowledged, "but marriage would indeed change Mrs. Turner's legal status." He stroked his beard thoughtfully. "However, Mr. Blackwell does raise a valid point about the timing." "Judge Wilson," Noah said respectfully, "Mrs. Turner and I had already decided to marry before Blackwell showed up yesterday. Ask any of my hands, they've seen us growing closer for weeks. This isn't some desperate measure, it's the natural conclusion of our feelings for each other." The judge studied them both. "Mrs. Turner, is this true? Are you marrying Mr. Cooper of your own free will, not merely to escape Mr. Blackwell's claim?" Margaret met his gaze squarely. "I'm marrying him because I love him, Your Honor. The fact that it resolves this situation is a blessing but not my primary motivation." Judge Wilson nodded slowly. "I see." He turned to Blackwell. "Given these circumstances, I believe the most straightforward resolution would be for Mr. Cooper to pay off any remaining debt, after which Mrs. Turner, soon to be Mrs. Cooper, would be free of all obligations." "This is outrageous," Blackwell protested. "No. What's outrageous is your transparent attempt to force a respectable widow into working at your establishment," the judge retorted, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I've heard the rumors about how you treat your female employees, Blackwell." Sheriff Wilkins stepped forward. "Judge, I've reviewed the bank documents. There is indeed an outstanding loan of $300 plus $23 interest." Noah immediately reached for his money pouch. "I'll pay it now in full." Judge Wilson nodded. "That would seem to resolve the matter." To Blackwell he added, "Unless you have some other objection." Blackwell looked from the judge to the sheriff, clearly realizing he was outnumbered. "This isn't over, Cooper," he muttered. "Yes, it is," Noah replied evenly, counting out the money. "Mrs. Turner's debts are now fully paid. And once we're married, I expect you to stay well away from my wife and son." The emphasis he placed on the words "my wife" left no doubt about his intentions to protect them. After the money changed hands and receipts were signed, Judge Wilson surprised them by offering to perform the ceremony right then and there. "Since I'm already here," he explained with a small smile. "Unless you had your heart set on the church in town." Margaret and Noah exchanged glances. "Here would be perfect," Margaret said. "This is our home." The wedding took place on the front porch of the main house an hour later. Mrs. Abernathy, summoned from town by one of the hands, arrived just in time to witness the ceremony and fuss over Margaret's appearance. Henry stood proudly at Noah's side, holding the ring, a simple gold band that had belonged to Noah's mother. "Margaret Turner, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Judge Wilson asked. "I do," Margaret replied, her voice clear and certain. "And do you, Noah Cooper, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Noah's blue eyes held hers as he answered, "I do." "Then, by the authority vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife." Noah's kiss was gentle but filled with promise. Henry cheered, and the ranch hands who had gathered to watch broke into applause. Sheriff Wilkins and Blackwell had departed immediately after the debt was settled, but Judge Wilson stayed for the impromptu celebration that followed. Mrs. Abernathy outdid herself preparing a wedding feast, and the bunkhouse guitar was brought out for dancing. As evening fell, Margaret found herself on the porch with her new husband, watching Henry play with the ranch dogs. "Are you happy?" Noah asked, his arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," she answered honestly. "When Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. I never expected to find love twice." Noah's arm tightened around her. "I never expected to find it at all." He kissed her temple. "Thank you for giving me a family." "Thank you for saying they stay with me that day," Margaret replied softly. "You saved us both." "You saved me too," Noah murmured against her hair. "More than you know." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Margaret looked out over Cooper's reach her home now, truly and legally, and felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey from the auction block to this moment had been unexpected and sometimes frightening. But standing here with Noah, watching their son, she knew without doubt that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The seasons turned at Cooper's reach, summer giving way to autumn's crisp mornings and golden aspen leaves. Margaret settled into her role as Noah's wife with a happiness that sometimes still surprised her. They moved into the main house together, converting one of the spare rooms into a space for Henry, who delighted in having the largest bedroom he'd ever known. The first weeks of marriage brought adjustments for all of them. Noah, accustomed to living alone, sometimes retreated into silence that Margaret gradually learned wasn't displeasure, but simply his way of processing his thoughts. Margaret, having been independent out of necessity since Thomas's death, had to remind herself that sharing burdens was not weakness but partnership. Henry adapted with the resilience of childhood, though occasionally he still had nightmares about the auction. On those nights, Noah would sit with him, telling stories of brave cowboys and their adventures until the boy drifted back to sleep. One crisp October morning, Margaret woke to find Noah already gone from their bed. This wasn't unusual. He often rose before dawn to begin the day's work. What was unusual was the sound of hammering coming from behind the house. Curious, she dressed quickly and followed the noise, finding Noah and two of the hands constructing what appeared to be a small building near the kitchen garden. "What's this?" she asked, pulling her shawl tighter against the morning chill. Noah looked up, smiling when he saw her. "Good morning, wife." He came over to kiss her, a greeting that still sent warmth spreading through her body. "It's a surprise for you, a surprise that requires hammering at dawn." She teased. "The best kind," he replied with a grin. "You'll see in a few days." True to his word, 3 days later Noah led a blindfolded Margaret to the now completed structure. Henry bounced alongside them, clearly in on the secret and bursting with excitement. "Ready?" Noah asked, his hands on the blindfold. "More than ready," Margaret replied. The blindfold came off and Margaret gasped. Before her stood a small but beautifully crafted greenhouse, its glass panels gleaming in the autumn sunlight. "You mentioned wanting to grow vegetables year-round," Noah explained. "I thought this might help." Margaret walked inside, marveling at the wooden planters and shelves. A small wood stove in one corner would provide heat during the coldest months. "Noah, it's perfect," she breathed, turning to embrace him. "Thank you." "Look, Mama," Henry called, pointing to a corner where a small desk and chair had been set up. "Pa made me a spot too so I can help with the plants." Margaret's heart swelled at hearing Henry call Noah Pa so naturally now. It had taken only days after the wedding for it to become his standard address. "And that's not all," Noah added, gesturing to a package wrapped in brown paper that sat on one of the shelves. Margaret unwrapped it to find several packets of seeds and a beautifully illustrated book on greenhouse gardening. "Oh, Noah," she said, blinking back tears of happiness. "It's wonderful." That evening, after Henry was asleep, Margaret and Noah sat together by the fire, his arm around her shoulders as they discussed plans for the greenhouse. "I was thinking we could try growing some flowers too," Noah suggested. "Bring some color to the winter months." Margaret leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'd like that." There was a comfortable pause before Noah spoke again, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "There's something I wanted to discuss with you," he began. "Something important." Margaret sat up, noting the slight tension in his expression. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about Henry," Noah said. "About his future." "Is something wrong?" Margaret asked, immediately concerned. "No, nothing wrong," Noah reassured her, taking her hand. "Just the opposite. I want to formally adopt him, make him legally my son in name as well as in my heart." Emotion tightened Margaret's throat. "Noah." "I know he'll always be Thomas's boy too," Noah continued. "I would never try to replace those memories. But I want him to have my name, to inherit this ranch someday, to know without doubt that he is my son in every way that matters." Tears spilled down Margaret's cheeks. "Nothing would make me happier," she whispered. "And I know Henry would feel the same." Noah pulled her into his arms, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. As they held each other by the firelight, Margaret marveled again at how completely her life had transformed in just a few short months. From the desperation of the auction block to this moment of profound belonging, it seemed almost miraculous. The legal adoption was completed before Christmas, with Judge Wilson again presiding. Henry proudly signed his new name, Henry Thomas Cooper, in careful, childish letters on the document. "He's a fine boy," the judge commented afterward. "You're building a fine family here, Cooper." Winter descended on Cooper's Reach with a series of heavy snowstorms that blanketed the ranch in white. The greenhouse proved its worth, providing fresh greens when the roads to town were often impassable. Christmas brought a special joy. With Henry wide-eyed at the presents, Noah had secretly ordered from Denver a wooden train set, new books, and a small saddle sized perfectly for a growing boy. For Margaret, there was a delicate silver locket containing miniature portraits of Noah and Henry, and a promise to take her to Denver in the spring to see an opera performance she had mentioned wanting to experience. January brought a development that neither had anticipated so soon. Margaret confirmed what she had begun to suspect: she was expecting a child, due in late summer. When she told Noah, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He lifted her off her feet in his excitement, then immediately set her down, concerned he might have been too rough. "Are you all right? Is the baby all right?" he asked anxiously. Margaret laughed, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "We're both perfectly fine and very happy." They decided to wait to tell Henry until the pregnancy was further along, but their son proved more observant than they'd given him credit for. "Is there a baby in your tummy, Mama?" he asked one February morning as Margaret sipped ginger tea to settle her nausea. Sally at school said her mama was sick in the mornings when there was a baby coming. Margaret exchanged a glance with Noah, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, Henry," she confirmed. "You're going to have a little brother or sister in the summer." Henry considered this seriously. "I hope it's a brother," he decided. "I can teach him to ride and rope like Pa is teaching me." Noah ruffled the boy's hair. "And if it's a sister," Henry shrugged, "that's all right too. I'll still teach her. Girls can ride, can't they, Mama?" "They certainly can," Margaret agreed, smiling at her son's matter-of-fact acceptance. As Margaret's pregnancy progressed, Noah became increasingly protective, insisting she rest more and hiring additional help for the household chores. Margaret appreciated his concern but sometimes found it frustrating. "I'm with child, not made of glass," she reminded him one day when he objected to her helping in the garden. "I just want to be sure you're both safe," Noah replied, his hand gentle on the swell of her stomach. "I couldn't bear if anything happened to either of you." The vulnerability in his eyes softened her irritation. "We're fine," she assured him, covering his hand with hers. "Better than fine. But I need to stay active, Noah. It's healthier for me and the baby." They compromised Margaret would continue her normal activities, but promised to rest when tired and avoid heavy lifting. Noah, in turn, promised to try not to hover quite so much. Spring brought new life to the ranch calves in the pastures, wildflowers on the hillsides, and the return of birds from their winter migrations. Henry finished his school term with high marks, making both his parents proud. The trip to Denver was postponed due to Margaret's condition, but Noah surprised her by arranging for a traveling theater company to perform at the town hall in Central City. It wasn't opera, but the Shakespeare comedy had Margaret laughing until her sides ached. "Next year," Noah promised as they drove home under a canopy of stars, "we'll take that trip to Denver, all four of us." Margaret leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "I'd like that." As her due date approached, Margaret found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. Sometimes at night, when Noah was asleep beside her, she would whisper thanks to Thomas for the friendship he had shared with Noah, the connection that had ultimately saved her and Henry when they needed it most. On a scorching August day in 1879, almost exactly 14 months after the auction that had brought them together, Margaret gave birth to a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. They named him William Thomas Cooper, honoring both Noah's father and Margaret's first husband. "He's perfect," Noah whispered, cradling his newborn son with tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Margaret, for him, for Henry, for everything." Margaret reached up to touch his face. "We've built something beautiful here, haven't we?" "We have," Noah agreed, leaning down to kiss her. "And we're just getting started." Henry was enthralled with his baby brother, appointing himself official protector, and announcing to anyone who would listen that he would teach Will everything he knew. Autumn came again, painting the hillsides in russet and gold. One evening, as the first chill of the season settled over the ranch, Margaret sat on the porch with Will sleeping in her arms. Noah and Henry were just returning from checking the fences, the boy chattering excitedly about a deer they had spotted. As they dismounted, Margaret was struck by the tableau they presented: Noah's tall figure beside Henry's smaller one, both with the same stance, the same careful way of handling their horses. Not by blood, but in all the ways that mattered, they were father and son. Noah caught her watching and smiled, that slow, gentle smile that still made her heart beat faster. He whispered something to Henry, who nodded and took both horses to the barn, proud of the responsibility. Noah came to sit beside her on the porch swing, his arm settling naturally around her shoulders. Will stirred but didn't wake as Noah brushed a gentle finger across his son's cheek. "Penny for your thoughts," he said softly. Margaret leaned into him, savoring his warmth against the evening coolness. "I was just thinking about the day of the auction, how terrified I was, how hopeless everything seemed." Noah's arm tightened around her. "I remember your face when I rode up. You looked so brave, even then." "I didn't feel brave," Margaret admitted, "but when you said they stay with me, in that moment I felt safe for the first time in months." Noah pressed a kiss to her temple. "I meant those words the moment I said them, though I didn't fully understand why. Now I do." "Why?" Margaret asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Because even then some part of me recognized what you and Henry would become to me," Noah said simply. "My heart, my home, my family." Margaret turned her face to his, their lips meeting in a kiss that held all the love and promise of their shared future. In the distance, Henry's voice called out as he finished his chores, eager to join his parents and baby brother on the porch. Will began to wake, his tiny fist stretching as his eyes blinked open. The ranch hands could be heard laughing in the bunkhouse as supper was prepared. This was Cooper's Reach, not just a piece of land but a gathering of souls, a place of second chances and new beginnings. As the sun set on another day, Margaret knew with absolute certainty that the auctioneer's gavel had not been an ending but a beginning, the first beat of a new and beautiful life that none of them could have imagined on that desperate day. And it had all begun with 7 simple words spoken by a dusty cowboy with courage in his heart. "They stay with me."